Hello and welcome to a special edition of Better with Vev, a conversation about how transport is evolving and what history can teach us about what comes next. If we take a step back, transport has always been shaped by moments of transformation. From horse-drawn buses to motorised fleets, fragmented private operators to integrated public networks, and now from diesel to electrification. So the big question is, are we living through another one of those moments right now? Today, I am joined by two brilliant guests, Mike Nakrani, CEO of Vev, needs no introduction, and I have to say, I think transport legend probably feels quite appropriate, Leon Daniels, formerly of Citybus, Transport for London, First Group, now chair of the National Transport Trust. So I don't think I can think of anyone better who can understand really how the system we rely on today was built. So together we're going to explore where transport has been, the journey we've been on, but also the kind of future we want to build. So Leon and Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I think I'm going to start with you, Leon, if I may. Transport has been through some huge shifts over the decades that you've been working in the industry. I hope you don't mind me saying. I think we've had all of those big changes that I just mentioned. When you look back at transport history, what are the lessons that really stand out for you?
And I was going to say, this is probably the biggest and most radical transformation that I have been through in all my decades. Because frankly, over much of our time on energy, we've been refining diesel. And everything that we ever did to try and reduce, emissions, broadly reinvented the diesel engine or refined the diesel itself. And we tried LPG and the CNG, we tried all sorts of things, but we all came back to cleaner diesel. What's radical this time around is the whole zero emission thing that we're doing now hasn't brought us back to even cleaner diesel. This time it's brought us back to either battery electric or hydrogen. And that's where we've landed. And there's no suggestion now that there is another version of even cleaner diesel engines coming at us. In fact, the legislation is going to stop it. So this is the most radical, and probably as radical as moving from horse-drawn to the original petrol engines back in the early 1900s.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, I know this is something we've talked about. I know you've worked out in China before. You've been looking at the hydrogen piece. I mean, this is a huge turning point, isn't it? What do you think from that sort of technology standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Leon even said it very subtly, but the point you're making is very valid. Interesting. Actually, my first managerial role at Ford was actually to become the implementer of common rail diesel engines at Dagenham plant. That was one of my first roles. But coming back to the point you're making, I think you're exactly right, which is if you look out, and I say you have to look to others who've done stuff before. When you look to China in particular, for them, it's a no-brainer. There's no question of it. It's done, right? They couldn't compete on traditional, I believe this was driven by a policy, but they couldn't compete on traditional ICE or diesel infrastructure. They weren't going to be Bosch or Siemens or the various global players. And they selected EV, but, fundamentally, it's worked out there and it's going to work over here. I think the ad I would say to Leon's point, and I think the ad also is the digital and data side of it is also coming together at the same time. So your ability to connect energy in a different way has also changed things a lot. So I think, and I would say absolutely, the hydrogen versus EV conversation is an interesting one. Looked at hydrogen for a long time, to be honest, and I always think, hydrogen will have its role to play, but I think in fixed as opposed to variable. My personal belief, it's a very there are laws of physics that make it a very difficult molecule, even though it's an attractive molecule, to win in the mobile space. And Toyota has spent, potentially tens of billions trying to make it work. And, such a successful company has struggled to make it really, run. But I'm, genuinely think EV race is won now. And it's about how you deploy it. And it's about how you do it in a way that's cost effective and efficient and done well, I guess, fundamentally. But you're right. But I do remember my days being the Common Rail diesel was a big shift, right? That's when you saw that massive improvement in emissions and other standards. And it was an interesting job as I started to work in clean rooms where talking about particulates for diesel and how you're going to make it better. A long time ago now. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, we're right to talk about hydrogen because I brought the first hydrogen buses into London in 2004.
Wow.
And they told me that it was just around the corner. That's 22 years ago now.
Yeah.
And we've continued to experiment with hydrogen. But if we look in the UK at the moment, every single one of the hydrogen bus experiments is not succeeding. Usually nothing to do with the hydrogen, as it happens, to do with something else, either the infrastructure or the fueling arrangements or other extraneous factors. But in the 22 years since we first played with hydrogen, everything you say about battery electric is true. The battery density has improved enormously. The price has gone down enormously. There's now big scale. There's now huge amounts of it all over the place. The fact that China as a country is turning into a battery electric type economy is not by accident. It was because they know exactly that the supply of oil is going to be very difficult. And they know this and that it's done. And now, of course, the Chinese car EV manufacturers are sweeping across Europe in a big way. And who knows, it's not even certain that the Mercedes-Benz of this world or the Audi of this world will even survive. Because when you have a situation where a company that started out making batteries for phones is now a significant auto.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
There's no guarantee that the traditional car manufacturers will survive either.
It's going to be a really interesting point. I mean, being ex-automotive is a bit, I worked for Ford for nearly 20 years now, so I like a bit emotional there in that regard side, but I think you're right to some extent. And I think the, coming back to the hydrogen point, I'll get the stats wrong, but the gist is pretty true, which is I think a year or so ago, there was about 17,000 or so hydrogen vehicles that were sold in the public marketplace across the world. That same year, there were 72 million EVs. So the race is won. The auto have invested in their massive facilities. They put down their facilities and toolings for the next 10, 15 years already, their battery plants, et cetera, and their supply chain to deliver the volume. And I think battery, you talked about the cost per kilowatt hour. When I first looked at EV, I remember we were talking about something like $600 a kilowatt hour installed. So that included the motors, the inverters, the wiring, $600 per kilowatt hour installed. And I remember the then CEO of Volkswagen saying, if you get to about $80 a kilowatt hour, you will now be installed the same as diesel common rail. I think we're about 110.
Sure.
Right. So not quite there, but pretty much close. And you may not need to be at the 80 because life cycle wise, if you do it correctly, because of the benefits of energy versus the necessary difficulties of sort of getting hydrocarbons out of the world and shipping them around the world, doing everything as efficiently as you do, plus the tax structure. Life cycle wise, you're seeing companies like Curse and Stagecoach and many others who are rolling out a scale because they see this as better financially, better for the customer and better for the environment. I think that's probably proven quite conclusively, I guess.
It is. And also, I was talking to the chairman of one of the big five providers, and they were saying that as soon as you've converted the whole bus depot to electric, then a whole lot of stuff is not needed anymore because the level of maintenance required is lower. The stock is lower. The skills are different. So if you can get away with the whole depot, you've already now banked some real saving.
Yeah, and that's where you have to look abroad. I think if you look, because I think it's a real shame, but I think sometimes we stay within our own world and market. But actually, if you look outside, there are whole depots out there in China. There are whole depots out there in Chile, Colombia. So one of our sister companies, DG Mobility, which I used to previously sell the board of, they have nearly 3,000 electric buses running at these whole depots. And the efficiencies they have, exactly your point, you don't need two sets of workshops. To some extent, it can be the worst of all worlds when you've got a half and half system, actually, because you're not truly exiting and taking any benefits of, let's say, exiting that system, and you're at the same time having to bring a whole new cost structure in to do that. So what happens is you end up in a little bit of a mixture, and that mixture can be inefficient, and then the inefficiency then result in the comment, "Oh, I didn't really work at it." But and the analogy I've used before, which maybe is a poor one, never driven a Formula One car, but I have talked to a couple of Formula One racing drivers, and I remember them telling me, I mean, this was some while ago, right? The big difference they learned when they were moving from Formula 3 up to 2 or something. One of the one that was that learning that you had to go faster through a corner for downforce than slower, and that if you went slower, you would spin off the track. And it stopped with it. It's like 30 something years ago having this conversation, which is actually approaching a bend and naturally you would slow down. But Formula One drivers are trained to go faster through it because the car will, the aerodynamics will hug down. And I feel electrification is a bit like that, which is if you do it slowly, it's okay while you're piloting. Then you get to a sticky phase where suddenly it gets difficult. And what you've got to do is you've got to progress through that phase to get to another bit. And that's for me the depot scenario. So rather than do 20 depots with 5 here and 5 here and 10 here and 20 here, better to do one and achieve the benefits from it and really work that system well than to try and, because the natural tendency is I don't want to take a risk. I want to do a bit of this. And the trucking industry has some parallels they've got to learn as well on that, because I think there could be a similar setup. You know, electric trucks are coming now. 40-ton electric trucks are now coming. Daimler's got them, Volvo's got them, Renault's got them, Scania. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing.
If we just take it back to buses and transport, you know, Better Transport Week this week while we're speaking. So, you know, we were looking at the numbers the other day. VEV's already got thousands of electric vehicles under management now, right? I mean, so that there is a lot happening now. There are already, those fleets are being completely transformed, the depots are changing. But I think what's interesting, we talk a lot about this is system change, isn't it now? So why don't you, I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more to us about that system change and how important you think that is in terms of that future of mobility.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'd love to hear Leon's point of view, because like as the operator and the procurer and then having to manage these large scale businesses that have to drive this. I think fundamentally, if we think about it's really overused. I hate the word ecosystem, but it's actually a good word, but I don't like it. I don't know why I don't like it. Why don't I like that? Anyway, but sitting, the ecosystem for EV is not there yet. It's partially being built, but the 100 years of refining oil has been there, and all those problems have been, they've been gradually, I guess, fixed, resolved. The proactive workers actually resolved them, and the system works and operates pretty well. And in the EV space, that's not been there. And that system you just talked about, well, I think, traditionally, when you think about a fleet operator, there's a vehicle, then there's a maintenance strategy, and there's a fuel card, or there's a bunker fuel setup, which is, BP or Shell have put a little fuel station on their site traditionally. And the person who goes and buys the fuel typically goes out and buys 2 years worth of fuel in advance. They run it's usually somebody in treasury, and they go buy 2 years worth of fuel. They go, right, okay, here's my RFP, and I place the order. Now, that system has evolved and is there. In the ecosystem today, the EV ecosystem is different. You end up with charging equipment. You end up with grid upgrade constraints. You end up with, do I need solar and battery on the roof of the vehicle? Is on the roof of the warehouse? Is that useful? How does that work? And then you have variability in pricing. And if you try and just fix it for 2 years, I mean, imagine if you fix right now with the Iran crisis for the next 2 years worth of purchasing your power. It would be, let's say, very inefficient if one assumes that hopefully the war will stop at some point, but it would be very inefficient. And pricing of energy changes every 30 minutes. And that system change is I think it's, and this is the other reason I talked about digital earlier on, you can't do it anymore in an analog way. It all has to be done with the data and the science that comes together with it.
That's right. And what the operators have been trying to do, if you accept like the bus operator, what he really wants to do is sell tickets.
Correct.
He doesn't want to manage his energy supply. He wants to sell.
He manages his driver and sells tickets.
He wants to sell. He is effectively a retailer. He wants to sell the product. And therefore, his natural tendency is to lock down as many of his costs as are possible. Lock down his labor cost, because broadly, the labor cost should be the same every week. If you run the same schedule, apply the same drivers, pay the same labor cost. Energy hasn't been too difficult to lock down because we've been able to hedge our fuel. And then the big one was maintenance and its friend, accident, damage and repair. But actually with the transition to EV, not only have we been able to deal with the risk on energy, because unlike diesel fuel, energy is two-way, right? You can sell it back to the grid. You can buy it from it. There's all sorts of things you can do with it.
Absolutely.
And then the telematics that have come with it have allowed all the other engineering savings as well. And certainly it's predicted that the use of AI in the public transport space, the biggest saving is not going to be labor, it's going to be planned maintenance. So now we're in a situation where we have the technology to
That's
really
a
bear
really
down
great
on
insight.
planned maintenance.
Really great insight, actually.
In public transport, on road public transport, labor is about 50% of the cost. So you'd expect the biggest saving to be on the labor, but it isn't. It's on the planned maintenance. It's running the components till the day before they break. So if this component's going to break on Friday, so on Thursday I'm going to plan to change it. So I've got big fans.
I lose the downtime. I lose the downtime entirely, and my spare strategy is so much more efficient. Instead of just having heaps of spare parts and heaps of spare capex spent on waiting for something to break.
Yeah,
very good point.
And so the telematics is joined at the hip to the whole zero emission thing, because the telematics has been driven in any case by optimizing the energy, both in the buying and selling of the energy originally, and then the use of the energy, and using it wisely and so on, taking into account temperature variations of all those other things covered. And also that the battery itself is now a component that you can measure the efficiency of in a way that you can do with other cells.
Every cell has a sensor on it. I mean, literally, you can get every cell. And the OEMs have that data. Whether they give that to you easy or not,
it's a question about who owns the data.
Yeah, exactly.
But ultimately, some clever person will make it into a nice dashboard that you can look at, and you can say, look over there, bus number 7. It's just out of kilter with all the others.
For us, that's our data science team.
Yeah.
That's what they've got to do. But I'm with you exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the whole thing. And I mean, I think, the whole conversation, I remember seeing that sign above one of my ex-vice president's door, which is like, in God I trust, all others bring data. I'm sure that's on many, I remember it from many, again, a couple of decades ago, working for somebody who had it above his door. And I thought, well, the data is there. If you can get
That's king, isn't it?
It changes it changes the way that you think about, it's now a computer on wheels with an energy system on it attached, and therefore it's a portable energy system. And then, I mean, the other point about I think as the growth of renewables happens and you get the intermittency, and if you think about how much flux there is in the system and the pricing changes, and then understanding schedule, understanding if there's 50 passengers on the bus, it's going to need more energy than if there's 5 passengers on the bus. And knowing that live and doing something with it, I think in the end it will be that sophisticated. I think it will be, because if the machine is now trying to help you figure out how to become more and more efficient all the time, it should be able to tell you whether that one extra passenger, 110 kilos, gets on the bus. Guess what? I'm going to use a tiny bit more energy, a tiny bit more.
So
energy.
now we could do differential pricing. We could charge you more.
There's too much like right now. Too much like right now. The right there. We're not going to go there.
Slow down, everybody.
But I think that coming back to the ecosystem that I've used word, the system thing, it's really exciting. I'm going to say it's really.
And then it unlocks the next thing. And this wouldn't have happened without the move to zero emission. It unlocks the next thing, which is autonomous. Then we take the labor out of the equation altogether.
Suddenly the cost per mile goes down substantially, et cetera, and suddenly you've got a totally different system in.
And big implications for mass transit, because we use mass transit at the minute because it's efficient to have one driver and 80 people. Without the driver, we don't have to have that. So we are much more likely to be having more small vehicles carrying small numbers of people than we are big mass transit.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Is that a good thing, though? Do you think? I mean, is it?
Well, you can play this both ways. You see, I've been campaigning for decades against the use of single occupancy vehicles. When we're about to introduce zero occupancy vehicles, because that's what an autonomous vehicle is, of course. So we're going to start to introduce that. There's a few things. What do you do with all the people who lose their jobs?
Societal change.
That's a societal change for sure. There is almost certainly then, and we are now looking a long way in the future, the blurring of the lines between the fact that presently vehicles are on roads and pedestrians on pavements and shoppers are in shops. In the future, with zero emission autonomous, it can take you into Selfridges. It's not just drop you at the front door.
I think it's amazing. I think lithium-ion technology, if you think about lithium-ion technology, together with that data, together with digital, and together with AI being able to control fundamentally the movement, I think it's going to be interesting what we see. And we don't know what those, I mean, there are there are some trends and themes that you can see, but you know, I always think the picture looks blurry. I can see some elements of the picture, but I can't see the jigsaw puzzle. I can see I've got the corner pieces, and I maybe got some of the straight edges.
Yeah, but
I don't know what.
you haven't got the cover. It shows you what it's going to look like when it's finished.
Precisely, and I don't know what we're trying to build, and but that in itself is exciting.
So
I've got to say,
No,
and if you're in, if you're in the transport industry now, it is a really cool place to be.
And I'm glad you said that, Mike, because we've always struggled to get good young people into transport because it's not very exciting compared with video production or sport or whatever, or the big professions like accountancy and so on. But actually, there are some really exciting jobs in transport now. All the data analytics, the innovation that we've just been talking about, thinking through how to optimize and further optimize and so on. This is amazing work for brilliant young people. And I hope in a way, this is the chance where young people want to work in the transport sector, as opposed to, as was the case in my day, you did it because didn't know how to do anything else. So now we're going to start to attract really clever people because the data analytics and the consequences not only are very important to you, but when you leave the office and go outside, everything you've just been working on is taking place in front of you. This isn't just like you worked in a factory, but you never actually saw the ball bearings being made. This is a case where you walk out of your door and around you is the very thing that you'd be working on all day, which I think will mean really good prospects for young people.
I think, and it could replace those jobs that we talked about. I think you could find that the thought process, productivity will increase enormously, and that will result in a different angle. But I'm with you entirely. I think fundamentally there's a big shift occurring, which is from being a very analog system to being now a truly digital, but also so net zero really is the catalyst for that transformation.
We wouldn't have had it without the net zero.
Correct.
We wouldn't have had it.
Yeah, because you have to do it because you won't be able to make the bus run.
Exactly. So we had to have significant computing power and communication capability in order to make zero emission work. And since we've got all that bandwidth, literally, then actually we're now using it to optimize not just the energy consumption, but the driving habits, the numbers of people that are traveling, whether they're male or female, or whether they're heavy or light, or all those things that you raised. So here's another social problem then. Zero emission leads the catalyst for some big changes in the route to autonomous. Some really interesting societal changes now. So we're here in London. Let's just pretend for a moment every vehicle in this city is autonomous. We've lived long enough to see that. You leave the office this afternoon, walk up to the street, press the button on the pedestrian crossing. Do you wait for the green man, or do you step out in front of the autonomous vehicle that you know will stop for you anyway?
Whether you will do, but can I? Well, I would say slightly different. Can I say something like maybe? And again, this is what I meant by the jigsaw puzzle. That I can imagine there is no pedestrian crossing. You don't press. You just walk. And you have the system is engineered for prioritization of the human and then the cyclists, and then there'll be a hierarchy, if I may call it, and the system will manage it somehow.
We haven't quite got to how we deal with cyclists and autonomous vehicles. That's another day.
But I'm sitting thinking, no, because remember, we all have, most of us anyway, have a mini computer of if you go back 30 years ago, you have some processing power in your pocket that is outrageous compared to 30 years ago. It would be a room, I remember seeing one of the big IBM supercomputers way back when, from a school trip. I'm trying to remember where we went, to be honest. We saw this huge room and had these massive things with like tapes running inside them. Does that ring a bell with you? I think, like kind of like whirring away. I mean, others won't anyway, but still my kids were like, what the hell are you talking about? And now you have the same processing power in your pocket, but that will know where you are. And what happens today is within a 10-meter GPS circle. Eventually, it'll be within maybe 100 millimeters of wherever you are. And at that point, the system is now going to say, we're in the matrix now, Emily.
Yeah, and a lot of people aren't going to like that, though, right? And so what do you think? I mean, I think, there's a big question here around trust, around regulation, the safety regulations, how you integrate into, how do you implement this work?
But think of it this way, just at the minute, the whole highway traffic modeling thing is done. So the computers are crunching data about how many people want to travel, where and what time, the density, whether they're on the metro, whether they're on the bus, whether they're walking on the streets and so on. And it's modeled. And you can visualize that model. And there is that model that is showing you what it will look like in Victoria streets. So now, what about if the visualization of the plan and the execution is one and the same thing. That's to say the modeling is so accurate that what it predicts is actually what happens.
It gets narrower and narrower and narrower.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the modeling and the execution is one.
It keeps adjusting. I think the way it'll adjust it, it'll adjust it to make it happen. I think
And you raised the point about privacy, which we ought to adjust. We ought to address because it is quite important. There will always be a lot of noise on talk radio about privacy and all the rest of it. But actually, between here and the station, there's CCTV on every corner. Our phone is already tracking our movements. There is a great clamour for more safety for people around the world. And I think the evidence is that people trade a bit of their privacy for the security.
exactly that point. I was saying, Emily, I would say, and just building on exactly what Leon said, I think we have a social contract with various, let's call it government forces or whatever you want to, whoever it is, authority, and which is there has to be value. If there's no value, then of course, it's the same scenario. If I'm sharing my data with you, there has to be a value for that sharing of data. If there is no value for me, and that could be safer streets, that could be faster processing, that could be easier, less bureaucracy, whatever it is. And I think the people who argue for it need to start reminding us of the benefits versus what tends to happen is you get a lot of vocal noise on the stuff against it. And I'm certainly not advocating all data gets given to everybody, and because there are potential for it to go wrong and all sorts. But in the transport market that we're in, I can say quite categorically to the customers, it will do this for you. And that should be valuable enough for you to go, okay, that's a compromise I'm willing to accept for that. And I think that's the way, exactly what you were saying, I'm positioning exactly the same way.
And there's another tricky one, which on the face of it looks easy, but it's harder. So in this country, we kill 4 or 5 people on the roads every day. Doesn't get on the news, doesn't get in the newspapers, nothing at all. Those 4 or 5 deaths on the roads in this country, pedestrians and road users, we tolerate it because it's the price of commerce, communication, living, capital, rest of it. So autonomous vehicles will be much safer, but not perfect. So instead of killing 4 or 5 people a day, we might kill 1 person a month. On the face of it, that's a phenomenal improvement. People should be thrilled that the introduction of autonomous vehicles has made very many more people who would have died will be alive. But does the society that currently tolerates 4 or 5 deaths a day by humans tolerate 1 death per month by software?
I think you're right, and I think it'll be interesting, and that could slow us down unnecessarily. But then we see that quite a lot. We see where data itself is available that shows why something is good, but you have insufficient, let's call it, belief in the system or willingness to look at the positive. You're looking at one side of the equation. I mean, just going back to autonomous, I mean, I think there is, we'll end up in a position where I think there'll be smaller vehicles, I'm sure. I think shorter journeys will be done very differently. I think, it might be a telephone box. I don't know, the equivalent of
going to beam you up.
Well, think of it like conference rooms here today. We have a lot of conference rooms here in the building, of course. But actually, if I look at it, the things that's used probably most, we have 2 phone booths, and they're used all the time because they're having a 1-person meeting, and they need a quieter environment because we're in the open plan environment. It makes it a bit easier to have and it might be confidential, it might be a personal call, whatever it is, but those single person booths are used more, I think, than the conference rooms. Some of you've got capacity that you never had, and I think that can happen.
No, sure.
And I'm just sitting there, but fundamentally, I was saying it's going to shift, isn't it? The world is going to shift from, let's say, traditionally about how you manage the driver, how you manage the maintenance, how you manage the traffic flow, etc., all these other bits and pieces, to actually how you manage the system.
Yeah. I feel like I want a crystal ball moment here from you, Leon. Like if you think about everything you've seen and, think about the passenger experience, what do you think, for a passenger, what are they going to want that's different today? Because we're so impatient, aren't we? I know I am. And I've started getting on a bike to go from A to B because I actually can't bear waiting for someone to come. I'm ready now. Is that getting worse, do you think?
It's a feature. We all want instant everything, There's a wonderful cartoon of somebody just peering out of the curtain, to which the cat, you ordered something on Amazon Prime, which is that you want
so true.
I want it delivered now. So amongst the things that will work on the mass public transport side is that your journey times may not get very much faster, but they get much more dependable. See, at the moment, you have a time budget. So if it takes you 30 minutes to get to the office, but sometimes it takes 50, you always allow yourself 50, so you're not late on those occasions when it is. What the system will do for you, what the optimization
precision.
will do, it will always be 30 minutes. It won't ever be 20 like it is occasionally.
It'll be Japanese, you're saying?
It'll be exactly.
It'll be Japanese. We could go to Japan today and look at it in real world, scenario.
And I like it in Japan because they're very respectful to older people. But you'll get more certainty, which I think is really important. So to your point, it might not be quicker, but it might be more certain. And in your time budget, that's worth something to you. And I think also so you get the benefits of consistency. It'll also be more personal. So just imagine, and this is a crazy example, but just imagine now if when you ordered an Uber, you could set some parameters for the person you wanted to ride share with, somebody who agreed with your religion or your football team or whatever. So you could just imagine if there were parameters where you could broadly filter who your ride share was going to be. The technology makes that easily possible now. Unlikely that Uber would do it, and certainly unlikely that
they do temperature.
Yeah, they do
temperature, and they do how much do you want your driver to talk? You can set it.
Really?
Oh, yes. Conversation, climate, music. You can do.
They can do that right now.
You can do all that.
Love that.
However,
I think the driver wants the reverse for me.
Yeah.
If you're sitting there going, shut up.
How do I turn this guy down?
Yes, I'll turn the heater on.
Yeah.
I think the offering will be more personal. In the same way now that people are choosing bike or e-bike or scooter or motorcycle, we're filling in all the sorts of modes of transport, all the way right up to mass transit, heavy rail. It'll become more personal, so you'll be using the thing that suits you best, of which a little electric autonomous vehicle capable of carrying 2 or 3 or 4 people is likely to be very popular, because it'll take you on your journey, it'll drop you off where you want to be, it'll toddle off and charge itself if it needs to, put itself back on the circuit. And I'm sure those things will happen. But so I think for your crystal ball, the journeys will become more consistent and they will certainly be more personal. Whereas now the times are very inconsistent and you are traveling, frankly, with 50 or 60 or 70 people who all feel strangers.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've got a little example of that with TfL. Like, bar things going wrong, of course, which do happen. I think you'll know the numbers better than me, to be honest, Leon. I take the tube everywhere fundamentally because I know that I'm going to get there within a certain amount of time. And it's, the frequency, I may not like the Victoria line at all. It might take me 3 attempts to get on the train because it's so busy, but I know one comes every 1 minute at Euston. So pretty much you follow that pathway, you're within that band. So I think that's very true. I do sit there thinking, the freedom, we live in London and people are very negative about it sometimes, but I've grown up with freedom to travel across London without even thinking. It's been something inherent in us, and you don't realize until you go to other countries and other cities that doesn't exist. Yeah, so your car-based structure, your bus-based structure, whatever it is, the expense of it, all of that stuff. And I forget that we have there's a privilege of having brilliant transport. And I think that, call it, overused word again, democratization of transport, whatever it is, but low cost effective transport to do what you need. I think that's where autonomous and others are going to enable you to get to work and back with it, and knowing you can do it in 30 minutes and not it's going to take you 2 hours because you've got to go by bus to here, then you've got to pick up a bike and then you've got to do this and you've got to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's still the same 9 miles. My office is 9 miles away from where I live. I can get there door to door from my home to the house in 35 minutes. Pretty much any day there isn't a terrible thing that's happened on the train.
Sure. And on the other side of that scale, the Riyadh Metro in Saudi Arabia did more to liberate single females traveling, there you go, than anything else in the whole kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They liberated a particular group of people who until then had not had the freedom to travel in the way in which we've enjoyed for decades. Indeed, for decades. So transport has this wide liberating thing that it does. And it was back in 2000 in London when Ken Livingstone, as the first mayor, said, I think the transport network in this city should be not considered as a profit and loss account. I believe it lubricates the economy It gets people to work. It gets kids to school.
So
It gets
true.
people looking for work.
So true.
It lubricates the restaurants and the bars and the nighttime economy and the theatres and all the rest of it. I'm going to put a lot of money into subsidising the cost of transport in this city, because all the benefits that accrue are worth more than the cost to me of doing it. And that's for every pub owner, restaurant owner, theatre owner, employer, school.
And here the bulk of it's electric.
And the bulk of it's electric.
Well, yeah. But I guess what we're talking about some really big innovations, but we're also talking about some incremental changes, aren't we? It's just making it better. You know, it's that, as you say, you know, it's not necessarily going to be a quicker journey every time, but actually just that consistency. Just actually, this feels better. I'm just getting the right outcome for me. We're time poor now, aren't we?
Sure.
Packing so much into our lives.
And some quiet things behind the scenes. We took cash off bus in 2014, and we had the call centres all fired up for the avalanche of complaints. We had 8 going to like nobody wanted to pay cash anyway. You know, the civil liberties people, and because nobody was disadvantaged. When we took cash off bus, we saved £24 million a year, because that's the cost of all the 5 minutes on the end of all the driver's duties to count the cash, and the cost of paying it in, and the cost of the safe, and the cost of G4S picking it up and taking it.
And the viruses from the money that showed you around.
And all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And of all the groups of people, and I did loads of TV stuff where I was attacked on behalf of various groups. What about the elderly? Well, they're free. Okay. What about the tourists? Well, they buy their Oyster cards before they leave. What about the unwaged? The unwaged, when we first had pay as you go, they were the first people to go on to pay as you go with a card, because the discount was so significant that if you were poor, the first thing you did was get the ticket that gave you the cheap. So there were no disadvantages.
Well, I think fundamentally, I think the problem is there's always going to be naysayers, aren't there?
Yeah.
The things, I mean, I do see the thing in that. I mean, I remember being in Hong Kong during one of my gap years at university, and they had a card-based system then.
Yeah,
in 1992.
Octopus.
Even 1992. It's usually.
And not just for the public transport. You use it in the shops. You can use it anywhere.
It was amazing. And I remember having to, because I was visiting a friend of mine who was living out there, and he said, we have to get you a card to be able to use the underground. I was like, and then you come back, and we were still using cash then. And when did we install the Oyster card system?
That's in the 1990s.
Right. So they had it. You know, I mean, and this is my point.
The late 90s.
We've got to.
I think the first staff trials were in 96.
Right. So we've got to be looking. I think that's one of the things I do feel passionate about, which having been lucky enough to live around the world and experience things in my prior career. The electrification, the digitization, the change of transport, the ability. I think you've got to do a lot more. We as leaders in the business have to do a lot more benchmarking and going out there. I think I've taken a couple of bus CEOs over to see our sites in Colombia, the electric depots. It's when you see the scale and you see it running, you're like, oh, okay. And then you talk to the guys, and everybody says it's better. The drivers say it's better, right? The people doing the maintenance say it's better.
Sure.
The transport operator says it's better. The customers think it's better. But fundamentally, like so, then you were sitting there going, and it was really interesting to me when I thought, and the eureka moment of that, like, okay, and this is in Chile. This is in Colombia, right? In Bogota, in Colombia. And I'm sitting in my home city in London. Yeah. And I remember my first trip to China years and years ago with BP. And I went, and my team in China, they took me to a bus depot. I went to this bus depot. It was in Shenzhen. Got to this bus depot, and this sort of minibus, and this minibus that was taking me up and down this depot, and it's in Shenzhen. I'm like, anyway, I'm saying to my team lead there, a lovely lady called Sabrina, and what are we doing here? Kind of stuff. She goes, just have a look. I'm looking around. There's it's quite messy, lots of cables and stuff. And this is and it was a really big depot. You had to have the minibus to get up and down the depot. It wasn't a depot like we think of a depot, which is still big, but it was a proper depot. There were thousands of vehicles in that depot. She goes, they're all electric. And that was August 2017.
Wow. Gentlemen, I'm really conscious of time.
Okay.
So, one question for you, right? Quick fire. One piece of advice to transport leaders planning for the next 20 years. Leon.
Get your best young people and put them in senior roles. and get all the benefits of their education, their lack of prejudices, and the amazing technological revolution that we've recently gone through, and put them in charge of some important teams of people to drive the business faster.
Brilliant.
You
Mike,
get sorry, how am I going to beat that?
well,
I don't know how to beat that. Well, no, it was competition, but I'd say change is coming, whether you like it or not. Right, the change is here. Actually, is what I would say, and I would say that this is a competitive advantage if you allow it to be, and you have to think that way. If you look at this as a risk and only as a risk, you will fundamentally restrict yourself in doing the things you need to do and learning the things you need to learn at the pace. And your competitors who don't take that risk on board in the same way as you, via employing young, talented people who don't have those prejudices, who can think out of the box because they're not in a box. Literally, they're not in the box that you've been grown up with, whether you like it or not. Believe it or not, they're going to win. And that is the real risk to your business. So I would say to all transport leaders, be they CEOs of the bus companies, be they CEOs of the logistics companies, be they other people in that ecosystem, it's here. And if you just go a little bit further out in the world, like East or to South America, you will see it. And it is fundamentally better. No doubts about it. Like fundamentally better. Can't think about, like if I list it, the small thing, but we did a survey recently with a bunch of lorry drivers, right? No, bus drivers.
bus drivers.
Bus drivers. And 87% of them said something along the lines of, thank God I don't have to put up with the noise. Right? And you just think, gosh, it's obvious now, isn't it? I don't think about that. But if you're in a bus for 8, 9, 10 hours a day and the diesel is ratting and the aircon is on and the blowers are going, all the other stuff, and you're sat there consistently, that's painful. Right? But you don't get that in an EV.
Yeah.
You do get the air conditioning blowers, to be fair. That still runs. Can't do much about that. So
No.
that would, I'd say get ahead of the change.
Good stuff. Thank you. Well, look, technology is moving quickly. So is time. We're going to have to wrap this up. So thank you, both of you, for such a thoughtful and very optimistic discussion, I think. And thank you for listening to Better with Viv.